Ooh, 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 do, do. This is how I do it. Yeah. Uh, 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 da, da, da. Yeah, da, da. Na 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 yeah 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 now always believe it. Mm, 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 mhm, mm, mm, ha, 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 mm. Mhm, 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 What? Toot, 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 toot. Da-na-na-na. Today, yum yum yum. Oh, hello, hello. I see that you have joined in onto this weird stream, huh? Anyways, today gonna be listening to a story called Mr. Ferguson. It's a very nice name to a story to begin with. Ooh, let's see. It's posted by the Odd Cat Lady. That seems a very promising name. Hmm. You should nah, forget it. Anyways, let us let you read along. Doesn't that sound fun? Boop, boop, whoop. Application window. Mr. Ferguson, hello. Oh, now, I think the whole street breathed a sigh of relief when we saw the EMTs take a body bag out of the Ferguson house. I was only about 10 or 11 at the same time. At the same time, I mean at the time. And it's been a while, so some details of my childhood are lost to time, but I can't forget Mr. Ferguson. There was never a Mrs. Ferguson in the picture, as far as I know. He lived in the house on the corner, the one with the bright yellow shutters and the gorgeous garden out back. The garden didn't make up for the rotten old master he was. I wondered once if he was nicer when he was younger, when he didn't have to walk with a cane and could actually get around without help. But my dad set me straight on that one. Mr. Ferguson had always been a terrible person and a neighbor. from hell. All day long, Mr. Ferguson would sit on his front porch in his rocking chair, grasping onto his black cane as he stared out on the street. If someone walking their dog even got close to his yard, he'd start spewing threats about what he'd do if the dog took a poo on his lawn. If a kid even if a kid put even a toe on his property, he'd get up from the chair and start shouting more terrible things. I learned my first cuss words from Mr. Ferguson. He didn't censor his language even among the smallest of ears, and he wasn't all talk. One of my friend's dog wandered into the Ferguson yard, just sniffing around as beagles do, and Mr. Ferguson beat that dog bloody. The poor thing had anxiety for the rest of his life, and if you so much as passed the Ferguson house with it, the dog would lose its mind. Other than him, our neighborhood was a friendly place. Summers were all full of cookouts and pool parties. Winters had Secret Santa gift exchange, and someone was always willing to help shovel out our driveway. You'd never be hard pressed to find a babysitter on short notice. Odds are your friends had a teenage daughter, willing to make a few bucks to make sure the kids were on bed in time, but not Mr. Ferguson. People did try to bring him in on this fun sometimes. He'd scoff and tell them to leave him alone in no uncertain terms. Mom said he just wanted to be miserable. I understand how someone could want that, and well, I still don't. One hot summer morning, though, his caretaker came in to do a check and found him in his garden, dead as a doornail. Nail. Probably a stroke or a heart attack. My mom made us go to the funeral. I don't know why, but she probably hated Mr. Ferguson the most, and we were like one of 5 people that went. One of those people was the priest. At least it was short. The priest just said a few words about how we should treasure our lives and be good to others, and then Mr. Ferguson was chucked into the ground. That was, or so I thought. The accident started happening just a week later. I was at a friend, Michael's house. We were playing board games when we heard the crash. It was so loud it shook the house, and Michael dropped a soda. Root beer spilled onto the carpet as we tried to figure out what that sound was for a second. Then we heard his dad screaming bloody murder. Forgetting completely about the spilled soda, we ran out to the garage where he'd been working on changing the oil in the car. Michael's dad was pinned by the car against the garage door, face white as a sheet, as his head lolled to the side. I saw blood splattered against the off-gray color of the metal, and I puked while Michael ran inside to call 911. It was luck that he survived. He never walked again, and health issues plagued him for the rest of his life. But for a guy crushed by a car, that's probably best case scenario. It was an accident, sure, but a weird one. The car just suddenly launched forward as Michael's dad stood in front of it, but there was no one in the garage with him, so yeah, it was just an accident. But the accident started happening more and more often. The next one was at the final pool party of the season. We were all at the Benson house because they just got in a brand new hot tub. There was probably like 12 kids running around. The sun was shining, the barbecue was sizzling. I had just gotten out of the pool to grab a lemonade and was chatting with Annie when I heard the pop. Mrs. Benson and her friends had been relaxing in the hot tub, making jokes and laughing until the pop. Their bodies suddenly went rigid before they began rapidly jerking about and twitching. Mr. Benson shouted if she was all right, and I heard this gurgled yell about before Mrs. Benson went under. The kids stampeded out of the pool, and I spotted something burning before I realized that the hot tub was on fire. Mrs. Benson and her sister ended up dying on the way to the hospital. The other woman ended up surviving, but not without some serious electrical burns. Electrocution via hot tub. Just an accident, but there was one more accident we all missed until we returned to the pool to see a little boy floating at the top. 3-year-old Maggie had fallen and during the chaos and drowned. Mr. Benson moved away after that, losing both his wife and the youngest child in that house. Just killed something inside of him. But after he moved away, we all saw it happen. His backyard became overgrown by plants, not over a few weeks, like what happens when a house is uninhabited and there's no one to mow the lawn. The very day after they left that house, the backyard was now filled with dandelions, daffodils, lilies, and all sorts of flowers that shouldn't naturally appear in the late summer. It was like a garden. Accidents happen, sure, but not like this. Not when a guy who's been working home improvement his entire life ends up toppling from a ladder and breaking his spine. Not when a mom trips and falls face first into the open dishwasher and ends up getting impaled on a knife. Not when a toddler was left alone for just a few seconds and ends up nearly drowning in the bathtub. Dogs ran into the road and ended up getting hit by cars. Kids fell from their bed bunks and cracked their heads like eggshells on their dressers. Teenagers got into a fatal wrecks. It was a mess. Two other families ended up leaving our neighborhood, and their yards had the same fate as the Bensons, completely grown over, a morbid beauty. Fall came and the yards grew brown, but the garden seemed to be even greener. The whispers started about the ghost that was such a terrible old bastard in life and was now a nasty poltergeist in death. Mr. Ferguson had never left our neighborhood. It all came to a head when a tree was struck by lightning, and a large tree limb crashed into our living room. I just tripped while picking up my things, and suddenly the roof caved in above me. I was lucky I was on the ground. If I had been standing, well, I'd probably not be telling you the story. 2 nights later, my mom woke me up. She looked grim. Come on, we're going to see Mr. Ferguson. When we walked out of the house, I saw everyone on our street was out. Everyone had the same grim look on their face. The deaths, the mutilation, it forever tarnished our street, and we'd all had enough. We walked down the street. I saw several guys walk into Mr. Ferguson's house with mallets and chainsaws, but we kept going with a few of the others. I saw that several of the adults were carrying shovels and containers of lighter fluid. We walked into the graveyard, and my mom led them right to Mr. Ferguson's grave. She took a deep breath. Start digging. It was a frantic endeavor of people who believed they were cursed. Dirt flew in the air and nearly pelted me in the head a few times. I hid behind my mom, who just stood there, stone-faced. Even now, the accidents weren't over. A man tripped in the hole and his leg snapped like a twig. He wailed as he was dragged away by a few others before they got right back to digging. Someone else got smacked in the face with a shovel and blood coursed down his face from his nose as he just kept on digging. Finally, the coffin was reached. The lid cracked open. Mr. Ferguson's body laid inside. He didn't even look dead. It was like he was just taking a nap. Then they started pouring the lighter fluid in. It covered the corpse's skin, his clothes. They probably added more than necessary. My mom struck the match and threw it in, shielding me from the sudden burst of flames. I didn't get to see the body, but I swore I heard that old man's yelling as his body burned. It was after all that. The gardens were all dead by morning, the accident stopped, and although we'd lost so many of our friends, over the past year, we recovered. New neighbors moved in, we welcomed them into our fold. One or two asked about the property on the corner, the one that looked like a tornado hit it, and we just say it was vandals. They stopped asking. We never talked about what we did to Mr. Ferguson's body, and soon we just stopped thinking about it. I grew up on the street. Eh, grew up on the street, and even now I was only live a few blocks away. And for so long, I wondered why our family was practically the only one untouched by the tragedy. We never got hurt, even when the tree branch came crashing into our living room. But I think I found my answer. See, my mom passed away a few months ago from breast cancer, and I've been going through her things. She's always been such a good, kind woman, and it was great seeing pictures of her helping plant the garden behind the church and teaching at the local school. But in the bottom of the box, hidden under dozens of other albums, was a picture from when she married my dad. Unlike the family picture with the groom, all it was my mom and an older man. I didn't recognize him until I flicked the picture over. On the back was written Pauline Walters, P. Ferguson, and the father of the bride. Wowee. That was fun. That seemed nice. That seemed like a really nice talk about your grandfather being the killer of many people. Like how could your grandfather just turn into something like that, huh? What do you guys think? How was that story? Huh. Hmm. Like, let's see. Let's just lower down the volume here. Let's see. Let's get some atmospheric music in here. It's a bit extreme. Hmm. Hmm. Shoot. Oh, something's going on me. Yeah. Anyways, on to our next story. The the uh the wax man in my basement. Ooh, that sounds scary, doesn't it? Huh? Ooh, let's get straight in there. The wax man in my basement, submitted by Eldorazi Horror. My husband, Anthony, was a beautiful man. At 30, you'd still call him boyishly handsome, though he had the sort of strong jawline that you'd only see on sporting goods store mannequins. I often kidded him with that. He just needs to grow some stubble and age a few decades to pass for a young Jan Ham. He'd retort that he couldn't have facial hair because of his volunteer fighter duties, the necessity of creating a tight seal between oxygen mask and skin, though we both knew that it would take him an 80-day week to grow a 5 o'clock shadow. Anthony and I had always been a quirky couple. We both gravitated toward the strange and macabre in our choices of art and entertainment. We tortured, we tortured, we toured cemeteries, went on ghost walks, and chose lodging based on advertised hauntings. On our way to the Jersey Shore for our honeymoon, we took a full day to the tour, the Muter Museum in Philadelphia, to see all the ghastly medical and anatomical oddities on display there. When we began looking for a first house, we knew we weren't going to live in a typical ranch house. I have to take a short break.
Let's go. Let's go some listeners.
The typical neighborhood. Yes. We first sold out old churches, small chapels, and renovated funeral parlors. We almost purchased a former Methodist chapel on the banks of the Tinowagi River before fate intervened in the form of a once-in-a-century spring flood.
Just lie down.
Now, where were we? Almost, yes, before fate intervened in the form of a once-in-a-century former Methodist chapel. No. Once-in-a-century spring flood. Only days before we were supposed to close on the property, Anthony and I were relieved that we hadn't been on the water on a mortgage and with the property, though we were still disappointed, as we had grand ambitions for that little chapel and its working bronze church bell. It was almost too perfect when a few months later, a former train station turned museum came up for sale. It was in our price range and only a town away from where we were renting at the time. Small towns in New York had been dissolving for years. Villages that had been around since the 18th century and early 19th century were fading away. And historical societies like churches were selling off properties at bargains. The purchase and our move into the Mint Green train station went smoothly. There was quite a few pieces of furniture and general clutter left over from the building's turn as a museum, and even from its time as a train station. Anthony loved the yellowed books and papers that he'd find tucked away in the beaten wooden furniture and 20th century cabinets. He read up on the history of the property, at the library, which was only on the next door, and would come home often on the weekend afternoon with some news stories or anecdote. Binghamton was jawed at 9:45 o'clock on Saturday night, and the western sky for a moment was aflame. Buildings trembled, people ran into the streets, and there was talk of an earthquake, said Anthony, reading aloud from a newspaper clipping he had on the microfiche one Saturday morning. So, it was an alien invasion, I choked, interrupting his flow. No, Sherry. Two trains collided here in 1901, and one of them happened to be carrying dynamite, he stated. Listen to this. A flash as if the heavens were on fire followed, and before it had died away, a deafening roar, which sent its vibrations for 75 miles, announced that the ruin had been complete. Anyone die? I asked, morbidly curious. He nodded. The dying groaned as they writhed in awful pain on the ground in the fields nearby where they had been thrown by the explosion. That's intense, I said. Anthony grinned at me, not veiling his excitement in the slightest. This place has to be haunted, he stated. It sat abandoned for decades after the fire, and the Historical Society only brought more stuff in after the renovation. There's still so much here that I haven't gone through. Anthony, I'd love the place, you know I do, but we're gonna have to get a dumpster and start throwing out some of your historical stuff, I said. We're going to need space too. It's burned into my memory, the way he smiled at me then. I still get weak in the knees thinking about it. Yes, there'll be a space for everyone. We'll need room for a couple kids, a pack of dogs, maybe even a cat. I stopped him from going on and on by kissing him. It was a few weekends later that we got into the nuts and bolts of clearing out Anthony's historical stuff from the basement. It was mostly broken furniture, filing cabinets full of the day operations on the museum, and cardboard boxes full of junk. But what I had my eye on, and what I had wanted to toss out since the first time I stepped foot into that basement, was a life-size wax figure of a train conductor. Tony, please tell me that Mr. Conductor can go today. He furrowed his brow, which was his way of letting me know that he'd at least consider it. Tony, he's all droopy, I pleaded. We couldn't display him anywhere like that. People would think we're shabby and he's creepy. I was right. The blue-suited elderly conductor had been through one too many hot summers tucked down there. He was already partially melted. His face mimed the worst of the stroke patients I'd seen at the hospital where I worked. Anthony went over to the wax figure to inspect him up close. After a few quiet moments, he placed his hand on the man's shoulder and turned to me. Yeah, he is pretty creepy looking, but he is a conductor, and this was a train station. I was genuinely irritated that my husband didn't immediately agree to toss the damaged waxman. Oh, please, Anthony, he's gotta go. I don't know what that he won't star in my nightmares. Just look at him. Anthony put his arms around the conductor and tried to lift him. Christ, this thing's heavier than I thought it would be. Well, don't strain yourself, Tony, I said. Well, we'll get a dolly or something and then get him out of here. Sure thing, babe. Yeesh. Oh, okay, we're alone now. Let's get back into this mojo about a wax man, huh? Okay. Over the next couple of weeks, I thought little of our conductor in the basement. I knew eventually Anthony would get rid of it, if only to please me, and he and I were busy with work and decorating the main and living areas of the house. Anyway, I was exceedingly happy with how things were going at the time. We were even talking about the timeline for us getting pregnant. When I came home from work one Friday morning with a bag of groceries, I packed in the little lot next to my quaint green train station. I thought it was strange that Anthony's car was gone. He was always home before me, and he rarely went out without spending a courtesy text. As I unlocked the kitchen door, I considered that maybe he'd gone out on a call for the fire department. He'd recently been promoted to deputy fire chief at the engine company and had recommitted himself to responding to every call. As soon as I opened the door and stepped foot into the house before I could even turn the light on, I spotted a man standing in the kitchen. I dropped my groceries and flipped the lights on, ready to defend myself. I clutched my chest and released a ragged sigh when I realized it was only the wax form of the train conductor. It took me a few moments to gather myself, and I grimaced at the egg yolk that was seeping out the bag onto the hardwood floor. Gosh, the hardwood floor. Oh, I couldn't gather myself. What? I couldn't believe that Anthony had done that to me, and I was livid when he came through the door for a few minutes later. That wasn't funny, Tony. I practically had a stroke when I saw that thing in here. Anthony paused in the doorway, a pizza box in hand, unsure whether he should make a run for it. Oh, the conductor? Sorry, babe. I got him upstairs, but then I wasn't sure what to do with him. I don't think we could just put him out to the curb for garbage pickup. I huffed at him, still shaking from a counter. I got pizza, he grinned dopily, which caused me to lose most of my head of steam. The waxman has to go, I pouted. He looks even more disfigured in the light up here. I'll take care of it in the morning, I swear. We settled in for the night watching Netflix, eating in the living room at my suggestion. I thought I'd get sick to my stomach if I had to dine within view of our melted cheese-faced housemate. It was around 5 the next morning when Anthony got cold to a fire. He scrambled out of bed and we barely exchanged I loved yous before I was back to sleep. When I awoke at 7 and padded downstairs, I didn't immediately notice that the conductor was missing from the kitchen. I made coffee and was headed toward the living room. I was once startled by the sight of the waxman. The conductor was now in the rear hallway, facing me, and positioned as if he was guarding the rear door. Shite! I burned my hand when some of my scalding coffee spilled out. I rushed to the kitchen and ran cold water over my injury. I didn't care why Andrew had taken the time that morning to move the waxman into the hallway. I was determined to finally get the damn thing out of my house. I couldn't get around the conductor to get to the back door, so I tried pushing him in order to get by. But he was too heavy. After some time straggling, trying to make any type of headway, I thought of a much easier route. I went outside and grabbed a length of rope from the shed and went back up the back stoop, and the door opened out. So I figured all I had to do was secure the rope around the conductor's torso and gave him a good pull to get him to topple down the back steps. When I had the waxman tied, I heaved on the rope and was surprised when he came tumbling down with minimal effort. I had to jump out of the way as he broke into a myriad of pieces on the stairs. I laughed at this clean decapitation, his warped face staring out at me, a bizarre mix of placidity and agony, and even kicked his deformed head across the grass. I then considered how I could dispose of him. We didn't have unlimited garbage removal, so I knew he wouldn't all fit in the trash bin the following week. You're wax, you can burn, I stated gleefully, when I remembered that we kept a gas can in the shed for the lawnmower. I used a snow shovel to pile up the broken pieces of our train conductor on the nearby blacktop, then doused him in gas and set him on fire. I watched him become engulfed in intense flames, and soon eerily melted away into a thick pool of blue and white. The pool itself burned for some time, and then I watched it in a trance-like state, satisfied with what I had done. After the fire finally extinguished itself, I let the wax puddle cool, and I was considering what I'd do now with the tar-like globs, which I knew I'd have to scrape off the parking area. My cell rang. "Hello? Sherry, this is Ronnie," came to the familiar voice. Ronnie was Anthony's fire chief. "Anthony's been hurt and is on his way to the hospital. Do you want me to send someone to pick you up?" I began to panic. My whole body went limp, and I really didn't know if I could drive to the hospital. "Memorial?" "Yes, you should already be there," said Ronnie. "Is it bad, Ronnie?" "It's bad, Sherry. I'm sorry. I'll be there shortly." I raced to the hospital. I was furious when they didn't let me go and see him right away. Ronnie tried to console me, but I was a mess, as anyone in my situation would be. All the guys from the firehouse were there. They all looked rough. An abandoned furniture factory had caught on fire, and it has been one hell of a morning. I was watching. One hell of a morning. For every firefight in the country. A nurse named Gloria came out periodically to give me brief updates. I worked in medical buildings, so I didn't really understand the technical things she was telling me. I was relieved when she finally said I could go up to his room in the intensive care unit to see him. "Mrs. Kearns, your husband is stable, but he is in critical condition," said Nurse Gloria. "His physician will likely advise that we fly him to Syracuse burn unit." For all the talk in the waiting room about the fire, no one had let slip the extent of Anthony's injuries. I was sweating profusely even before we entered the hot hallways of the ICU. What percentage of his body is damaged and to what degree? I didn't know the magic numbers of survivability, being a firefighter's wife. I was hoping for second-degree burns, less than 50% of his body, some serious lung issues due to smoke inhalation. Right now, we're estimating that 60% of his body has received third-degree burns. I collapsed against the wall as we walked. Gloria steadied me and took me down the hall to his room. Anthony was being attended by two nurses in the small room. They were giving him shots, running multiple IVs. I can't remember the details. I was straining ecstatic, giddy even, when I saw his beautiful, unmarred face. "Anthony?" I said it softly. I didn't dare touch him. He opened his eyes. He couldn't talk. The machines were breathing for him. He was covered in bandages. We made eye contact. It was enough at the time. He was aware of me. Anthony remained stable for the next 24 hours. The doctors were planning on airlifting him to a major hospital an hour away in Syracuse. I thought that he had a fighting chance. I hadn't left the hospital. I'd just gone to get a coffee when I returned. I saw that he had just yanked the tubes out of his throat. He was gasping for air. I reached to hit the emergency button to call the nurse, but his bandaged hand grasped mine before I could. "I love you, Sherry." His voice was barely a whisper. I leaned in and told him that I loved him, that we needed to get his tube back in, and he nearly sat himself up. I gently nudged him back to the bed. "What is it?" "You have to take it easy, Tony. I can't believe you." "I tried to get to you. I couldn't get through."
"What
are you trying to say, Tony?" I leaned in closer, staring into those endless green eyes of his. There was terror there. Fear of the unknown.
"Sherry!"
he gasped. "I saw you. In the fire." He began coughing horribly. It was only a few minutes before Gloria and another nurse rushed in to put his tubes back in. Soon after, Anthony closed his eyes for the last time. He passed away early in the morning while I slept soundly in a chair. by his side. I didn't want to stick around the hospital after that. Now I shook off the grief counselor, held in my tears, signed what I needed to sign, so they let me go home. I just wanted to be in our bed, hug his pillow, and smell him. Then maybe I could cry for a couple of days. But when I returned home, I was astonished to discover that he was waiting there for me. No, not the conductor. He was still a hardened waxen smear on the pavement outside. Standing in the back hallway in full firefighter kit was my beautiful Anthony, a pristine wax replica, every intimate detail down to the mole behind his right ear. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Wow, that was interesting, huh? You just turned into a wax figure, huh? That's quite the fascinating tale, isn't it? Too bad that he died, or did he? We'll never know. But who knows? All we know is he's dead, and there's just nothing we could do anymore. To be honest, it's getting quite late. Should I do another story? There's like lots of stuff. What should I do? Read one more story just before we all hit the hay. What do you guys think? You two people listening to this. It's really sad. Hmm. Okay, guys, we got one last story that seems quite nice, to be honest. It's called "Look Outside Your Window." That's quite the title right there. Look outside your window. Published by Revolutionary Rain in r/no sleep of Reddit. Look outside your window. What do you see? If you see nothing, that's normal. But maybe you see something. A bunny hopping across a meadow, a deer grazing peacefully, a junkie killing another junkie. But maybe you see something else. Maybe there isn't a window. That's even worse. There's nothing to see that way. You're trapped without a way out. One day, I looked out the window. It was pretty darn dark. Nothing out there, but I felt the urge to go outside. You see, I don't like going outside. I'm what one would call antisocial. I've never been good at blank blank blank. I've been good at interacting with people, and they never seem to like me much anyways. So I sat inside. I found a job that I could do a home to. And well, I lost it. Oh god. Found some delivery businesses around the neighborhood, so I never had to leave. Just paid online and left a note on the door to leave everything outside and knock, and was good for a while. I never had many comforts. I lived in a tiny studio apartment. Didn't make sense to get anything bigger. I had one window, but I didn't look outside. It was too nerve-wracking. Until that night, suddenly I felt it. The urge to go outside. So I did. It was odd going outside. People seemed repulsed by me. Granted, I hadn't done laundry in about 5 years, and everything I owned was a sort of mess. Comes with the territory of not going outside my apartment at all. But I looked at them, and all I could think of was how miserable those inside must be. Those will know one to take them outside to show them what I saw. So I began to show some the way out. It was hard to get the first one. It was some teenager wasting his time on video game and anime. What a weeb. But I got him. He's been a real trooper ever since. Afterwards, it was a lot easier. More people made it easier to get more people out. Granted, most of them weren't initially on board. The first kid went easier compared to some of these ones. Some were kicking, biting, and screaming when we first took them. But eventually, they caved. It took some longer than others. One holdout took a week, and before he was finally willing to join, and we became a group. Those who found those inside and brought them out. Naturally, the local authorities went fans, claiming that we were cluttering the area, scaring off travelers and families, that we couldn't just attack those that weren't one of us. How naive. They were outside, yet they weren't truly outside. The inside had warped them fully, so we went quiet. We had to quietly convert others to our group. We could only attack those that were the scum of the earth, those that no one would really care if they went missing. Occasionally, we get cocky, but we've gotten better at covering things up, and we grew. No more are we a small regional group. We're global now. We have a few brave souls willing to risk the inside again, to take some important positions. What we cannot say, but I've already said too much. So look outside your window. We're waiting. Goodbye, folks. This is the end of our weekly story time, I guess. I don't know what to do anymore. But if you leave anything behind, you could suggest something I could read out. Give me a link to read it out, and no rated 18 stuff, cause I'm a child friendly show. So send me anything you want. Goodbye.